wanted to start off with an illustration that I've never normally started off with this sermon. I promise I'm going to protect, or I'm going to change the names to protect the individuals. But I want to tell you about an instance I had at Ponderosa. Everybody knows Ponderosa. Everybody loves Ponderosa. We may even see each other at Ponderosa today. I was in Ponderosa the other day, and I happened to see another Christian brother, an individual that I don't know particularly well, but know well enough. And I didn't want to interrupt him because he was with company, but it was very apparent to me that he had been to somewhere with his business associates, and I think he had went to an auction or some sort to make some sort of business deals or whatnot. And I want to tell you, this guy that I know that's mostly reserved, mostly a very prim and proper guy, and he's still down earth, home guy you can talk to and carry on, have a conversation with. This guy was transformed when I saw him in the midst of the discussions he was having and the conversation and the camaraderie that he was having. You could tell that the art of the deal is something that this individual really understands and really has really taken hold of in many productive and good ways. But he made a statement that really just kind of resonated with me. He said, "The moment I quit having fun, you might as well just lay me in the grave." Or something to that effect. That may not be word for word, but the moment I stop having fun, the moment that this quits being exciting for me, the moment this quits really just taking hold of me, the moment I quit having fun with life, I might as well just be done. Is that what the Scriptures have done for us? Do the Scriptures continue to take hold of us? Do they continue to speak with us? Do they speak to us? Do they continue to resonate with us? Or do we just come to church? Where is the transforming power that transforms us from the everyday to getting to come here and do what we do? Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, throughout the rest of the things that go on here. I think we have a class on Tuesday night even sometimes. But when it comes to the gospel and the transformation, the power that it has to transform us, where do you get your source of transformation? I mean, do we go to church camp or some of the family camps that we've been involved with? Is it through regular Sunday service or anything that goes on here in the morning? Does the gospel somehow affect us at work or at school maybe? Does it affect us when we turn on the radio, the Christian radio? They still put the name Christian on some of those radio stations. Where does it happen for us? You see, because it can happen in all of these places if we simply allow it to. See, the power that the gospel has is to affect our whole lives, not just compartmentalized pieces of our life. You see, the power comes because it can be shared anywhere at any time, any place. It takes two very simple things. It takes someone who knows the gospel, preferably one that's a Christian, to share with one whom is not a Christian. That's all it takes. It's not rocket science, but it takes actual going and doing. It takes willingness, boldness, bravery, whatever you want to call it. And I want to seriously reflect on whether or not we've got that as individuals. Because the real life transformational power of the gospel, it's got to start with us if we're going to spread it. The Christians. That's where it's got to start. It's got to start with the Christians if we're going to be successful in growing the kingdom. I want to look at the conversion in Matthew chapter 9. And just look at how powerful the gospel can be in reaching not yet believers. Because I honestly believe that if we present the gospel in the right way, there's nobody in the world that wouldn't want to be a Christian. Not that's in their right mind anyway. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting in a tax collector's booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." Got up and followed him. You see, this was a very happenstance kind of meeting. This wasn't planned. Matthew certainly wasn't planning it. Jesus was on his way to somewhere. He said to Matthew, "Get up and follow me." You see, in fact, the gospel can transform anyone, anywhere. It can affect anyone, anywhere, at any time. See, who is Matthew? We identify him as many things. Most of the time we say he's the first guy in line in the New Testament books. He wrote the book of Matthew. That's very true that he did. There's more to Matthew than meets the eye. Gospel writer, apostle, witness to the various travelings and miraculous happenings and teachings of Jesus. Matthew was also a tax collector. I know we all have our own idea of the tax man in our minds, but tax collecting in this time was a whole different thing than what we have today. See, in this time, what we have in tax collectors in biblical times is basically a legalized thief. See, the job description of a tax collector in this time is you worked for the Roman government. And what you were to do is you were to collect a certain amount of dollars, X amount of dollars, to send back to the mothership, Rome. Along the way, collect your salary when you collected taxes from these people. As long as you sent back X amount of dollars, whatever else you got on top of that was for you. It's legalized thievery. The Jews considered anyone who did this, which Matthew was a Jew, to be a traitor to their own people. So guess what? Matthew was a traitor to his own people because he had aligned himself with the Romans rather than the Jews. See where we're kind of ramping up to. See, in addition for being viewed as a traitor by working for the Romans, tax collectors lined their pockets as much as they could. This was the standard understanding practice of the day. If you were a tax collector, it was expected that you were a thief, kind of like we look at most politicians today. This is likely why Matthew uses the terminology Matthew 18 for church discipline. The harshest of church discipline for unrepentant Christians when talking about church discipline. He says, if you take that unrepentant person before the church and they don't repent, you treat them as what? You treat them as a Gentile and a tax collector. You were not the lowest of the low on the rungs of the ladder of society. You didn't even get a rung. That's how low you were. He knows what it feels like. Matthew does. He knows what it feels like to be pretty much the bottom of the barrel, on the outside of the barrel. Matthew was an outcast, not just from one angle or a couple angles. He was an outcast from every angle of society. Where was Matthew? Physically, we know he was in the tax booth. When Jesus called him out, he was at work. Of all places for Jesus to come along, he's got to be at work. Of all places, it was in the middle of his workday. Now, I'm going to chase a rabbit trail here for a minute. And I'm going to say that at least in theory, I don't believe this, but at least in theory, we could say that Matthew may have very well been sinning by over-collecting taxes when Jesus came along. Matthew could have been overcharging somebody. He may have even been planning to overtax Jesus as he was coming along. Maybe he saw Jesus coming down the road, coming down the pike, and thought, this strange cat coming down the road. Wonder what I can get out of him. We don't have. It's possible in theory. We have no indication that that's what happened. But there's also no indication that Matthew knew Jesus prior to this account or had any dealings with Jesus prior to this account either. So it's possible that he sees Jesus coming along, thinks to himself, I work for the Roman government. I have the backing of Rome to do whatever I need to do, to collect whatever I need to, and if not, he goes against Rome. I've got the upper hand in this situation to charge him whatever I want, or to require of this man that's coming along whatever I want. Jesus comes along, just says, follow me. That's it. Follow me. You see, the original Greek presents this as a command, as coming from someone who has the authority to command. Not a thoughtful suggestion, not a if you've got nothing better to do, not if you're getting off work early. It's a follow me. You see, we know where Matthew was physically. He was at work. He was in the tax booth. But we have to understand, where was Matthew at spiritually when Jesus came along? We've already kind of said this, and I'm going to turn over a lot of old ground consistently in this sermon. He was an outcast, a man who was despised by his job description alone. Because so far, we've only defined him by his job description as tax collector. We don't know anything about the man personally. I don't think he was sinning, as I posed in the theory a minute ago. I think he was despised simply because of his title alone. Kind of like today, we use politician, lawyer, car salesman, whatever. Those things automatically bring to mind certain things sometimes. But we have no evidence Matthew was crooked whatsoever. Only that he had the legal backing to do so if he was the kind of man that would choose to do so. So who was the real Matthew? Who was the Matthew seeking something the world could not offer when Jesus came along? It was a lost and searching soul. Maybe it's a very successful guy. One of the best at what he did. Maybe he was an upright tax collector, but still very well-to-do. One of the best at what he did, but it still left an empty hole. Left wondering, what's it all for? What's it all about? I've climbed to the very top, the pinnacle of success, money-wise, but still feel this emptiness. You know, I'd suggest to you today that many of our sports stars and music stars and prominent figures in society, they reach the top. You see them in the news every week for this, that, or the other, for the same kinds of things. They strive for the things that they're told to make them happy. They get to the top. Nothing there. Matthew was a spiritual wanderer. He had this inclination, there's got to be something more, something better. Matthew was the sheep without the shepherd. And in the middle of this soul searching, sitting in the tax booth, wondering what's it all about, what's it all for, Jesus comes along. There's Jesus. There's this guy coming in. Follow me. I think because he's lost and he has no other inclining whatsoever, he goes. Matthew chapter 9, verses 36 through 38 tell us, seeing the people, he, that is Jesus, felt compassion for them, because they were distressed and dispirited like the sheep without the shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. See, I know it's bounced around Facebook quite a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. It sounds crazy for Jesus to leave the 99 to look for the one until you're the one. The transformational power of the gospel can infect anyone, anywhere as well. Not just affect on the outside, but infect on the inside. Look at Matthew chapter 9 again, verses 10 through 13. Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came. They were dining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners? When Jesus heard this, he said, it is not those who are healthy who need a physician, those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire to have compassion, not sacrifice. For I do not come to call the righteous, but sinners. You see, in verse 10, you see that Matthew was grateful for being called and given direction. He was a lost soul. He had no direction and was given direction. He invited Jesus into his house for a meal. That has much greater connotation than necessarily what it does today. Matthew gives us this account in Matthew chapter 9 in a manner to not glorify himself, overly glorify himself, or at least that's the thought of many of the commentators. But Luke records this same thing. And Luke says this wasn't just a gathering. This wasn't just, hey, Jesus, come over to the house, we're grilling out hot dogs. Luke says this was a grand feast. This was a grand feast, a banquet like nothing else. Some of the best things that happened in this day. This was on par with that. Matthew had the money. We know he did. He's a tax collector. He just charged the people to come along. But as we've said, Matthew was a Jew. Matthew worked for the Romans. Therefore, Matthew was an outcast. So you got to remember, Matthew was simply a Roman employee. He was not a citizen of Rome. He was an employee of Rome. You know, he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore before his tax booth is cold. They got somebody else to fill it. But he was given something much greater. He was given that transformation. He was given refuge. He was given a place to belong where he belonged nowhere. When no one else wanted him, when no one else cared for him, he was given that place by none other than the great shepherd. See, Matthew had experienced transformation. Not just a good time, not just a happenstance meeting with Jesus. He'd experienced the transformational power that Jesus has in the gospel. And he got it straight from Jesus himself, no less. You see, what did Matthew do in response to this? He got all his friends together. Now you got to think, who are his friends? He's an outcast on both sides, Romans and Jews. So who are his friends? His co-workers, his colleagues, the other tax collectors. All those who are also outcasts, who are also the lowest of the low sinners. What did he do? He got them all together. And he introduced them to Jesus. I want to give you a thought from Hebrew culture that sometimes we may skip over in our understanding of this. In Hebrew culture, much different than our own, you're actually looked down upon for having too much wealth. And in that case, you're to find ways to spread it around. Completely different from our culture. We're told to pile it up as high as you can. But the more you have, the more accolades you get in our culture. Exact opposite in Hebrew culture. Likewise, if you're the recipient of some wealth in some way that's been bestowed upon you, it's not your job to go around saying, what a great guy I am because I did this and this and this. No, it's the people you helped out to go and build up your name because you've done great things in this culture. Now, I've mainly been talking about physical wealth. But you see, Matthew's on a whole different thought plane right now. See, Matthew, who has just come to know and follow Jesus, has been given spiritual wealth that will not perish. He's been given wealth beyond all measure whatsoever. So what does he do? He finds the most efficient way to spread it around. Matthew throws a party and he rounds up Sinners Row so he can glorify Jesus to everybody. Because he wants to spread Jesus as far and wide as he can, so that they can have the opportunity to be transformed as well. Acts chapter 13, verse 47 tells us, "For so the Lord has commanded us. I have placed you as a light before the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth." I would hope we would all understand that means the Christians have to show the unchristians what Christianity is. See, the gospel has a universal call to be affectious and infectious with the message of Christ. Simply put, if it's not us, who else? The Christian radio station? The TV preachers who rake in millions and millions with stuff that I don't even know we could call the real gospel message? Stuff that's been watered down? Books that are written to be companion to the Bible that still refer to Christ? Matthew rounded up his friends so he could glorify Jesus to them right in front of them. We don't know who was there. We don't know exactly what was said, but we know that Matthew was spreading the fact that Jesus called him to something much greater. He called him to transformation, which led to him leaving the tax booth. Out of a life that left him searching for answers to questions the world absolutely could not provide, into a much higher, greater calling. We know it eventually to be apostle and so much more. Matthew wanted to spread the news, invite everyone he knew to come and hear about Jesus, that they might start a life of discipleship and transformation as well. You see what impression was left on Matthew? What do we see in the gospel account? You see, sometimes I think we miss the sense of wonder, the sense of majesty, the sense of awe because we fall into a routine. Too many times I think we read the scriptures as if they're written in a vacuum, kind of like the monotone voice of Ben Stein. Maybe we should look at Matthew's account. This section in particular, and maybe we should gather ourselves for a different reading of the text. Now, starting with Matthew chapter 8, I'm going to run through about 2 chapters in about 30 seconds. And I'm going to give you the sense of majesty that I think Matthew's got going on here. Guys, let me tell you about this. This Jesus, let me tell you what he did. He cleansed a leper. He healed the centurion's servant. He healed Peter's mother-in-law. And many more that same night. He cast out demons. He cured the paralytic. And then right in the middle of talking about all these miracles, Matthew says, Jesus found me, the lost sheep, and took me because he wants me. You're here at this grand banquet tonight because he wants you too. Then after Jesus pauses to talk to his friends, he continues on with more miracles. Healed the woman because she touched him. Jesus wasn't even trying for that one, but it happened. The woman touched him and she was healed. Jesus brought a girl back from the dead. Jesus healed 2 blind men. Jesus healed a mute, demon-possessed man. And finally, chapter 9, verse 35. This is a rough paraphrase. Matthew just says, there's just too much to tell. I can't write it all down. It can't all be written down. Jesus went around just doing stuff like this. This is just what Jesus did. We all watched him, all the followers, the apostles. We've watched him. There's just not enough space in all the world to write this stuff down. But this is the kind of stuff Jesus just went on doing. Like I said, we just hit 2 chapters pretty hard in about 30 seconds. But given the manner in which these miracles are brief and fired off in such rapid fire, puts me to mind of someone who's just got to write it all down before it's all forgotten. Before it's relegated to history, before in today's time we have scholars who just write it off as, well, did that really happen? Did it really happen like that? You see, he's made the lame to walk, the blind to see. He's cast out demons. He's commanded the elements, the winds and the seas, to stop. And they stopped. Now, I've gotten pretty good at hollering at kids to stop in their tracks. But I'll tell you, as much as I holler at the wind and waves, it doesn't happen. You see, Matthew says, people see us tax collectors coming. And they automatically have their assumptions. How's he going to do me wrong today? Jesus came along and said just the opposite. I'm going to show the rest of the world I'm here to do them right. Just to prove it, I'm going to take the low of the low and do it. He extended the hand of forgiveness and healing, not to those in the religious realm that didn't think they really needed it. He reached to the rejects of society, the poor, the widows, the down and out, the lowly, the lame, the blind, lepers, liars, thieves, drunks, prostitutes, and yes, even the tax collectors. Matthew, most likely in my mind, would have said, and look around at this banquet you're at. Look who's here. The tax collectors, that's right. And look who is sitting across from us. What more do you need, or rather, who else do you need to consult with to understand who this is in our very midst? And He's chosen to be here among us, knowing who we are. He's the one true living God the Son, who's come to seek and to save the lost. And brothers, they ain't no more lost than us. Praise God that Jesus is willing to come for even tax collectors such as us. Are people moved by the overwhelming presence of Christ in their lives? Some are, some aren't. Some have become complacent about it. What is it that really gets you fired up for Christ? Amazement in your Christian life that leaves you speechless in majesty such as Matthew. What leaves you speechless when you stop and meditate on the Word? Or are we the kind that gets upset if the sermon runs longer than 20 minutes? You see, Christians have got to either have, develop, or regain this infectious quality. Because if the rest of the world doesn't see that we're fired up about the church, they're going to want to come. Unless they're filling some sort of a community participation requirement for a job of some sort. But because we are carriers of the greatest news in the history of all creation, we have a great responsibility to outwardly display our Christianity so that it is affectious and infectious, so that those who are lost and seeking might have a light in this world to be drawn to. May we be bold in our spirits to take action in spreading the great news of redemption through Christ to all of the known world. However, it seems many of us can't be infectious enough to sometimes get to church consistently because we either haven't been affected or somehow we've lost it. Woe to us if we've lost it. Matthew chapter 5, starting with verse 13, tells us exactly what it means to be woe to us if we've lost it. You're the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it become salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand. It gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. You see, salt and light both have qualities that affect that which they come into contact with. Qualities that affect change, a lasting change. Change that is transformational. This is the gospel we're called to carry into the rest of the world. This is the embodiment of what it means to carry the gospel message in all of creation. And I had this thought this week. You see, if you get the idea that coming to church is being a Christian, that's like going to Lowe's and going to the aisle that has all the lights in it. They're all lit up. It's all super bright. And that's fine. We're supposed to come together because we have certain things we're supposed to do every Sunday. But the church is not just us gathering. It's going into the dark world and being the light. See, the transformational power happens when we carry it to the darkness. Transformational power starts with us willing to carry it to the darkness. It is a gospel that is affectious and infectious. It'll transform if you allow it to. People will notice a difference in you if you allow him to. But you got to live it. Matthew was affected to the point of being infectious, and he left us a record of being lost and found. A map so that we too may allow the path of discipleship and foster a lifelong relationship with Jesus to begin. And that's it. If you're here today and you've not been infected in one way or another, if you've not repented of sin, confessed Christ's needs for atonement, then He alone is the way to restoring your relationship back to the Father and to be baptized for the forgiveness of those sins and the indwelling gift of the Holy Spirit. Guess what? Matthew comments on that too. Jesus said, "Go unto all the world, baptizing and making disciples." It's a rough paraphrase. But you're supposed to do it when you're made aware of the fact that you're supposed to do it. If you've never accepted Christ in this manner, you haven't fully accepted Christ according to the gospel plan of salvation, we got plenty of capable people here. Leaders, preachers, Christians who can baptize you. Simply invite anyone at this time who wishes to experience this transformational gift of forgiveness to come forward at this time as we stand and sing our hymn of invitation.